My name is Steve Song, and I have a fellowship at the Shuttleworth Foundation in South Africa, working on telecommunications and access issues. So my big challenge in my fellowship is to address the cost of access in Africa, which is disproportionately high. And what I understand to be the problem of the cost of access is a lack of competition and markets that are largely controlled by a few key players. So in order to address that issue, in order to get into the market, not only do you need a license to be a telecommunications company, but you need access to spectrum, and spectrum is hoarded typically by regulators and governments, and the only way around that at the moment is to actually use unlicensed spectrum, Wi-Fi spectrum, and that's what's really given birth to this project we have called the Village Telco.
What is Village Telco all about?
Well, it's taking low-cost Wi-Fi access points and turning them into telephone infrastructure. Initially, we thought to repurpose commodity Wi-Fi equipment from North America and from Europe, and deploy that and create telephone networks that way. But it turns out that those devices aren't perfectly suited to creating telephone networks, because you need another device called an analog telephony adapter, and you need the two devices together to plug a regular telephone in. And happily, one of our group, David Rowe, is an open hardware designer, and at one point in our conversation said, why don't we make our own? And this was a tipping point for us, a revelation that we could actually design our own open hardware designed for Africa, designed for low-cost rural telephony solutions. And that's what gave birth to a device that we call the mesh potato. And
so, before you go on with this, open hardware, what is it for you? What do you mean by this concept of open hardware?
Open hardware is an analog of open source. So it's building on the principles of open source, that you can leverage the goodwill of others and their interests by being transparent and making sure and guaranteeing essentially that that their ideas are not going to be ripped off. They're going to be shared by anyone. So open hardware means that the design for this device that we've come up with is available on the internet. The schematic, you can download it. You can manufacture your own mesh potato if you'd like to. And we think that by giving away the intellectual property, we actually gain more back in terms of goodwill and contributions from others, and solid trust-based partnerships than we would if we tried to hold on to the intellectual property, say like the OLPC did.
So go ahead with the mesh potato.
Okay. Well, it's actually very simple. It's an ordinary Wi-Fi device, but it also has an RJ11 port in it as well that you can plug a regular telephone into. So once you start plugging these in, they form a wireless mesh. So each one becomes a repeater for the next one. So you can instantly create quite a wide coverage of these devices, and each one you can plug an ordinary telephone in. So that these have a variety of uses. You could set them up autonomously, say in disaster relief situations. You could create an instant telephone network. But you can also, and in fact our principal focus has been to design them for a small entrepreneur who could then gateway the telephone calls to the mobile operators, to the public switch telephone networks, and to long-distance, inexpensive voice-over internet services, and make a business out of offering low-cost telephony. And the idea being that anywhere that there's interest in people developing their own infrastructure, they can. And why shouldn't communities actually be able to build their own infrastructure and then negotiate with the operators to who can provide them the lowest cost access outwards? So it's a kind of democratization of the telephone networks.
Could you give us maybe one precise example how a model of this could work in a community, in a rural area, somewhere out there in Africa?
Sure. Well, actually, the best example I have at the moment is actually in East Timor. So an NGO called Fongtil in Dili mobile infrastructure is there, but it's expensive and a little bit patchy. and they've begun to deploy mesh potatoes. I think they have somewhere between 25 and 50 now deployed, connecting key NGOs in the area and also connecting people involved in development work. So it's a kind of customized telephone network, but the ability to make free calls without thinking about what the cost is actually has a profound impact on the way people behave when they use telephone networks. So I'm a great believer that that when failure is expensive, I'm borrowing Clay Shirky's line, really. When failure is expensive, the lesson you learn is don't do that again. Right? If you went into a casino and went up to the blackjack table and it was $1,000 a throw, and you played and lost, your lesson would be never go back there again. But if it was, if it was free or if it was very, very cheap, you might learn to play blackjack. I'm not suggesting that telephone networks are like playing blackjack, but if telephone infrastructure is very, very cheap, then I think you will unleash a torrent of innovation, of people thinking up creative ways to use phone networks for all kinds of things that we haven't begun to see. I think we've just... we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of innovation on this continent, and I think lowering the cost of communication is the key to unleashing it.
So what is actually your business model? Selling those mashed potato boxes, or? So
yes, I mean that's what we're about to do. We're only going into mass production in about 3 weeks' time, and initially we'll be selling mashed potatoes, but hopefully other people will start making these devices as well, and we'll begin to focus more on the actual software that facilitates that and the firmware that drives these devices.
So actually you said you were working for a foundation, but now you are kind of outsourcing and start up your own business with this. Is this right?
That's right. So the foundation has given me the opportunity to develop this idea, and now it needs to stand on its own 2 feet.
This whole concept sounds a lot to me like it's something in between this one OLPC, one laptop per child, and the phone thing Martin Wasowski does. Where would you position yourself in between these two concepts, and where do you see relations? Where, would it make sense to come together, to work together, or is it complete new third thing?
We don't know yet. I think that there are lots of potential connections, and we've designed these devices as generically as possible to allow them to be integrated with other kinds. They run a very standard open source firmware called OpenWRT. They run a very popular mesh networking protocol so that you can use them with all kinds of different devices. And we see loads of opportunities of kind of mixing and matching infrastructure to suit people's needs. So we're trying to make it as useful as possible without trying to predict the future too much, because often these things turn out to work out a little differently than you plan them.
Do you think there is a lot of education needed? When I look in those rural areas in Africa, or when you go to China or India, do you think you need to teach people how to use this? Or
so this has been one of the big challenges to affordable Wi-Fi infrastructure. Is you need to be a bit of a guru to set them up. And our goal with the Village Telco is to make them so easy to set up that your grandmother could set them up. So you can actually they're designed so that when you plug them into a Village Telco network, they'll actually phone you to tell you that they're connected, and then prompt you to dial a number to get configured to the network. So what we thought was a limitation of it being a phone device as opposed to having a screen or something turns out to be an opportunity for innovation, in that you can actually use the phone to help people use the devices easily.
I would like to know the ideal profile of the investors for the business.
Of the investors for the business?
Yes.
Our goal is to look for investors who are actually also interested in the social mission of the Village Telco, because this is a social enterprise. It's not just a for-profit business, and we're not. I would rather just bootstrap the business on my own rather than be aligned with an investor who didn't actually have that social mission as well.
And how do you measure their intention then?
By the way they shake hands. I mean, it's
Very good answer. I like this
it's
answer.
a gut feel kind of thing. I think people say a lot of things, but you really need to feel that they have. And I think that 10 years ago they would have been harder to find, but I'm optimistic now that there are more of them about.
How would you say to the investors that are having no understanding or very little understanding about Africa continent opportunities and challenges, but they are interested in investing in innovations such as mashed potato? How would you say to them to build up that confidence towards investment?
I would say that telephone companies are a very lucrative business in Africa.
Yeah. Do you have some numbers? Numbers in mind how the telecommunication business is growing here?
I don't off the top of my head. I mean, I do have access to them, but I can't quote you. I mean, I can tell you that in Kenya, the average Kenyan spends 50% of their disposable income on mobile services.
Can you please repeat this?
Yeah, in Kenya, the average Kenyan spends 50%. Now, that may change now that the prices have just come down in Kenya, but that as of last year, that was true. So this is
50% of. So what do they use it for? For
all kinds of things, right? And not necessarily. I mean, a lot of it is social.
They're making profit or generating jobs with the mobile.
It's both. I mean, but it's not as much business as you would imagine. It's a kind of life enabler. It's a general purpose shortcut device. It stops you having. It stops you waiting for hours to meet someone, and it saves you from. And it is. I mean, it is a business enabler, sure. But so I mean, yeah. There's a ton of money. I mean, Safaricom in Kenya last year generated $1 billion of revenue, roughly 50% of which was gross profit.
These are numbers, yeah. I mean, you often hear this quote, the revolution will be mobile in Africa.
Yeah, and so why am I developing a fixed wireless Wi-Fi device? Because people like simple answers, especially development agencies. They like mobile for development. That's the route. The truth is, it's always going to be more complex than that. It's an ecosystem of communication infrastructure, and this is a perfect complement to mobile services that delivers free local connectivity and can be very targeted in terms of delivering services. So, for instance, if you had an expatriate community, or a migrant workers, you could target a Village Telco to connect to Village Telco. Say, Nigerians working in South Africa, or in South Africa, the people working from the Eastern Cape working in the Western Cape. You could actually connect those communities and target services towards them. I think, there's no question. I mean, mobile devices are amazing. But there's a lot of room at the table for alternative solutions that can actually increase competition in the market. And also, what we're beginning to see in the US and Europe is Wi-Fi being used as alternative backhaul for mobile devices. So we're already looking at running the same mesh protocol on Android phones to start with. That can create a kind of, people shouldn't have to care whether they're on a mobile network or a Wi-Fi network. I mean, the technology should be invisible for them. And Wi-Fi is amazing. Wi-Fi, I mean, it doubles in capacity and performance roughly every 30 months. There's an equivalent law to Moore's law called Cooper's law, after Martin Cooper, the guy who invented the mobile phone. And he says there are similar metrics in terms of wireless performance happening. So things are only going to get better with Wi-Fi. The next generation devices will actually be 600 megabits per second. So I think we're onto something.
Do you see a mashed potato phone?
Yeah. So Antoine over there has actually developed a mesh client for Android. Yeah, it's called Batdroid. And
he's the one I want to talk to next.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and he's partnering with there's another guy in Australia who's working with local operators to actually deploy this, so you could actually create peer-to-peer networks on your smartphone. I mean, the only problem is smartphones. in Africa, or a
It's,
tiny percentage of the market. There's a kind of real disconnect, I think, between North America and Africa, and that everyone has an iPhone in North America, but Nokia still owns this market here in Africa.